Hey everybody, welcome to Pop Culture Philosophers. Welcome to the year of PCPX. And if you ain't down with PCPX, I got two words for you. Coffin Comics. Man, I am so excited. We got a great guest today. This dude has done it all. He basically runs an empire and he's been doing it for decades. You know him, you love him. Let's not waste any time. Let's bring him in. Everybody, give a mighty, hearty, warm and welcome station to our good friend Brian Pulido. What is up, man?
What's up, you psychopaths? What's up, everybody?
Dude, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule and making some time for PCP, man. That's awesome. Well,
I'm all about it. I'm all about it, man. Thank you for having me.
Of course, dude. Before we got started, I was talking that I had met you. I reminded you that we had met briefly a couple years ago. There's the picture right there. I was very, very excited to meet you in Memphis, and I still got that print right here.
Excellent.
Yeah. I still need to get this framed. I want to put it in the bedroom, if you know what I'm saying.
Hey, get that mood going. That's Coffin Comics is an aphrodisiac.
Absolutely, right? Yeah. I mean, my girlfriend's like, yeah, you should frame all of those sexy pinups you got and stuff and put them in the bedroom. Let's do it. I got this Linnea Quigley poster ready to go.
Excellent.
And yeah, dude. So, man, super excited to have you here, man. If anybody doesn't know, and they should know, you, of course, are the creator of Evil Ernie, Lady Death, Purgatory, all of that stuff back in the day with Chaos Comics.
Yeah.
And you're still doing it with Coffin Comics. You're still doing your thing. You've always done it on your own way. And I really, really respect that from you. I think it's absolutely amazing, man. So let's get into it, man. What got you into comics to begin with?
Well, for some reason, I've always enjoyed the interplay of words and pictures. I grew up in the New Jersey Shore in the 60s and 70s, and my family would go to flea markets and auctions on the weekend. And there were two that were really awesome. One was called Collingswood Auction in Collingswood, New Jersey, and the other, the big kahuna, was Englishtown Auction. So this would be the sort of place, giant indoor place, selling everything you could imagine, from plumbing parts to socks. However, in both cases, these places had these cool bookstore storefronts. And if you knew to wind into the back, these places both had magnificent displays of recently published comics. So as a small kid, I'd walk in and see all these bright, beautiful, colorful images. This was even before I could read. And I gravitated towards everything in the beginning. So I'm reading Richie Rich, Casper, 70s Marvel, Monsters, X-Men, all this kind of stuff of the day. And I was buying whatever they were selling. So it might be the type of comics that had the tops of the logo area ripped off or without covers, or ones that had printing errors. And I think that's how these people got the comics, perhaps. And eventually, I just started gravitating towards the 70s Marvel Monsters, the hero stuff. I pretty early on identified that there was this really unique creator putting out wild stuff, and that was Jack Kirby. And I identified him from Commandy. I think my first Commandy, I could be wrong, I think it was like number 19. He was leaving a Disneyland-like amusement park that was themed after the Chicago mob. So since a very early age, I've always loved that interplay. And so early on, I'm collecting this stuff, but informally. I'm just attracted to it. Somewhere along the line, I think I was 13, would it be? I was 13 years old. I go into a local pharmacy and I discover a comic book rack. And the comic book that really attracted me at that moment in time was Captain America 176, published in July of 1974. That particular issue has Cap quitting being Captain America. But why that is an important moment for me was that was when I began realizing that they still put out these comic book things and that they come out every month or bi-monthly. And that began my very consistent habit of collecting at this point now, 50 and a half years ago. So that's the genesis of it.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I love how so many of us have the story. And this is something that a lot of it's kind of sad because like it hasn't existed for this way for a while, but like so many of us have that story. First time I saw comics was at a grocery store, at a convenience store, on a spinner rack, you know, stuff like that. I had a dad who was in the Navy, and he loved comics, and he would like buy them when he would be stationed somewhere, and then he would ship them to me.
Oh,
Right?
cool.
Now, I could read anything I wanted to, but not his Savage Sword of Conan's. But of course, into his bedroom to like read those when they were out, you know, clubbing or something like that, right?
So hang on. So my trick with that stuff was early on when I started collecting, I realized that if I could put the stuff out on the rack for the shop owners, it first of all, it saves them the bother, but it also gave me first crack. So not only was I putting out the comics on a weekly basis, I also got to put out all the Warren, the Creepy, Eerie, Vampirella, the National Lampoon, all that stuff that was still kind of edgy. So I got access to all that from the very beginning.
Oh, that's so freaking awesome, dude. I had a grandmother who worked at a place in town called Christmas Charities, and people would like donate toys and food and stuff, and they would like give it out to families during Christmas time, families in need, right? So when I was a very small, like probably like 10 years old, my grandmother would bring me there to work on days I didn't have school so that I could sort the toys. Because these old women that worked there, they had no idea what a G.I. Joe or a Transformer were. So I would just separate them all out. My fee was I got to take a small box home every day. And I was like, so it was just like, oh man, this is awesome, dude.
I know as a child, you feel like a millionaire. You know, me getting that first crack one time on the rack was Nova #1. And I just thought that was such a stunning cover. And I still think so. So I got this idea. I said, you know what? I'm going to go around to every comic shop or every pharmacy that carries comics. And I'm going to buy every Nova in town. And then I'm going to wait a couple weeks and I'm going to resell it to my peers who collected comics. And that was like early speculation from me. And that's exactly what I did.
You've been a businessman for a long time then, man.
That's what I'm saying.
That's awesome, dude. I love that you mentioned Jack Kirby being the first kind of name that you recognize. That's always a very important moment in a comic book fan's life, right? And their journey is when they realize that these aren't just comics that show up randomly out of nowhere, but that people make these things, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And for me, the first name I recognized was John Byrne, right? Because the 80s was when I really started reading. It was like 86 is when I started. John Byrne, Superman, his Fantastic Four. I've been a Fantastic Four fan my whole life.
Well, he had a great run. He had an amazing run.
And my favorite comic of all time is Fantastic Four, especially the Kirby and the Lee stuff. And I love the Byrne stuff. But man, my second favorite Marvel comic is Tomb of Dracula.
Nice.
And you mentioned 70s Marvel, and they were really leaning into, I guess they had laxed up some of the comic code authority stuff at the time. So they're able to do like Werewolf by Night, Monster of Frankenstein, supernatural thrillers. Was that something you were super into at that time?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, and I'm still into that. Nothing has changed, frankly. Yeah, I think what Marvel had seen was that there was a lot of popularity in main pop culture for horror and Dracula movies, etc., Hammer horror, and that Warren Publishing was having a great success with stuff like Creepy and Eerie. So yeah, of course, I picked up early on with things like Tomb of Dracula, Monster of Frankenstein, Werewolf by Night. The list goes on and on, right? Son of Satan, Ghost Rider. And, to this day, I just love and adore those characters. And the fascinating thing is, it isn't always exactly the exact comic book in particular. It's just what those characters feel like to me, how I would imagine them to be. But that we were also very lucky as fans that some really great artists were working on that, like Gene Colan on Tomb of Dracula or Mike Plug on early Ghost Rider and some of the Werewolf by Night stuff. So they have a nice history.
Yeah, some of the absolute greats working back then on those amazing books. I love Tomb of Dracula. I have Marvel did the complete collections in color with their new like super gaudy coloring, and that's fine or whatnot. But I still have my essential Tomb of Draculas where it's the black and white.
Yeah.
There's nothing better than seeing Gene Colan in black and white. That stuff is amazing. Changed my world when I first got a hold of those, man.
No doubt. He just has a ton of energy, very atmospheric, great stuff.
Yeah. All right. So we know how you got into comics. We know how you got into reselling comics and becoming kind of starting your business savvy a little bit early. But what was it that made you decide, I want to make these things. I want to be one of those dudes whose name is in the credits of a comic book.
You know, it's interesting. I had not really considered that until I turned around 26. And this is what happened. I'd written a screenplay for Evil Ernie prior to it ever being a comic book. And a dear friend of mine got it right to the producers of the motion picture Hellraiser. They read it, they liked it, and they said, we'll make it. So they sent an agreement, and I would get a chance to direct it. But there was something about the fine print that I didn't like, and it was this. They would have paid me $40,000 to write and direct Evil Ernie. And yet I would have no ownership of it. And I just couldn't get past that. And I ultimately passed on that opportunity. Now, I don't know how things would work out. I actually don't quite look at things that way, but I really did do that. And I did that as a penniless college student. So what I decided to do instead was I had this realization that a screenplay unto itself has no life or existence. But if something can be brought into life, it's actually viewed differently by those movie people. So I decided to make Evil Ernie into a series. And that actually began a journey that took about 3 years to adapt it as a comic book, locate an artist, which took time, then begin to make that book, and then shop the package of it, quote unquote, around to see which publisher would publish it on the terms that I thought were most favorable. So that's how that came about.
So Evil Ernie was published initially. Was it Eternity Comics? Is that what it
Yeah.
was?
Yes, and that was an imprint of Malibu Graphics.
Okay. How did you get connected with Stephen Hughes? And when I first started getting into your work, Stephen's artwork was amazing. I still love
Dynamite.
looking at his work, man. And one of it's so sad. It's so tragic that he's no longer with us. But
Yeah,
how did that partnership start with him?
So very simply, I needed an artist. So I had written the book. I placed 2 ads, one in a magazine called, like a newspaper magazine called Comic Career Newsletter, and then the other one in Comic Buyer's Guide. And in fact, right now, as you and I speak, we're in my official archive, and on the wall are those actual ads. So over the course of time, about 70 artists replied. And out of those 70, I tried out about 11. And in the end, even those 11 failed for some reason, whether it be professionalism, they weren't their promise, or the work just didn't hold up. So candidly, I quit. I said, you know what? I guess it's not to be. I'll just go back to my regular job. And my regular job at the time was I worked as first assistant director on commercials and music videos in New York and in Los Angeles. And not there long after I literally quit, I got one more submission. And that submission, to surmise it quickly, featured the art of Stephen Hughes. So I ultimately made a deal with Stephen, visited him. I lived in New Jersey at the time, visited him in Boston, and we instantaneously had a chemistry. And I hired him to illustrate Evil Ernie. And that was the beginning of a wonderful 9-year collaboration before his untimely passing, which actually the anniversary of which was just 2 days ago, I'm sorry to say.
Oh man, that's crazy. This is my copy of Evil Ernie right there.
Nice.
Which you signed for me. The art is amazing, and Lady Death first appears in this book, right? If I remember correctly.
You do remember correctly. Yeah, Lady Death was actually Evil Ernie's reason for pursuing Megadeth. She was encouraging him to do that. When I introduced Lady Death, she was a bad guy, no way around it. She wanted the death of all life on Earth, as epic and as insane as that sounds.
Yeah, I love it, dude. I got this is when we met. I had this signed. I had this signed. You even commented. You're like, man, I don't see these very often come across my table, man.
I don't. It's true.
Yeah, I love black and white, outlaw, alternative, underground kind of art, and Hughes's work just blew my mind, man. So Evil Ernie was like a screenplay. So were you writing that screenplay when you were working as an assistant director?
Yeah, so that's what I was looking to do. So being an assistant director is actually the manager of a set, and it's not viewed as a creative role in a motion picture. It's a managerial role. And I couldn't quite at that time in my life. I'm 26 years old. I just didn't know how to navigate towards the creative side. So that's why I started working towards writing a screenplay to be viewed as a writer in that field.
All right. How did this all lead to Chaos Comics?
Well, we actually, through Malibu, the first Evil Ernie series was put out, and it was considered a cult success. And we began negotiating a sequel for that series. And we actually had the deal done as a verbal deal. It was going to be in color. There was going to be more money involved, which I would give to Hughes because that's how we were doing it. I was, obviously it's a lot of work. So I felt like the money should go to him and, I'll just keep working. So we agreed, let's say on a Friday. And then on that Monday, Malibu called up and said, you know what, we reconsidered the offer. We're not going with it. Have a good life. Bye. Click. And so at that time, I'd already kind of poked around and realized that there probably wasn't another deal out there. Not other publishers weren't quite getting what I was doing. The whole blue collar, hard rock, heavy metal thing, it was kind of a little lowbrow for people's taste, not artistically, critically acclaimed kind of stuff. It was just more like, balls to the wall, heavy metal horror comics. So I made the crazy decision of saying, I know nothing about this, but I'm going to publish this comic book. So I declared that in November 92. And then in June 93, Evil Ernie, the Resurrection premiered. And that is how that came to be.
Dude, that's awesome. And Chaos ran for a while there, and
Yeah.
you picked up a lot of licenses. I remember you did like a Halloween comic. I remember you even did some WWF stuff. I
Yeah.
still have the Rock comic
Yes.
that y'all
Yes.
did, man.
Oh yeah, we had a great time doing the licensed. I also, let's see here, we also published Insane Clown Posse and Static X and Megadeth, all of which actually I have great stories for, and they were all fine and really, really easy. So I've nothing but great things to say about all those experiences.
Yeah. Well, so when I first became aware of your work, it was through Wizard Magazine. And Wizard Magazine was so important to comic book fans in the 90s, right?
Yeah.
And you were in Wizard Magazine all the damn time, Brian, like all the time. And like, that's what made me take notice. Plus I'm like 13, 14 years old. So there's a good reason why your work like appealed to me, being a big fan of horror films, being a big fan of sexy people. And like, you were always there. How important do you think Wizard Magazine was to the success of Chaos Comics and Lady Death and Evil Ernie and all that stuff?
Well, I do think that the relationship with Wizard was somewhat symbiotic. So I think it was good for all parties, and that would be true of Image's relationship to Wizard and ours. It's interesting you bring it up. Now looking back on time, I'm actually friends with quite a few of the people at Wizard. But there were two things going on at the time with Wizard. They were recognizing the absolute takeover of Coffin Comics in the comic marketplace. Lady Death was the #1 most collectible comic book on their top 10 list for over 2 years. But at the same time, they always grappled with the TNA element, as if I always found that kind of fascinating. Now it's all these years later, and I'll see those guys from time to time. We could kind of have a laugh about it, but we did a lot of contests together. We were on the top 10, and yet they were kind of always poking a little fun about, them being, what they are, which is, comics that celebrate boobs and blood, which I have literally no apologies for. So it was a symbiotic
relationship.
Shouldn't,
Brian.
Yeah, I don't care. Yeah, and so I think both parties benefited a lot. And I also credit a friend who's a friend of mine to this day, Jim McLaughlin, who is actually the president of the Hero Initiative, the comic book veteran fund that raises funds for comic veterans in need. Actually, Jim worked for Wizard. We got along like a house on fire, and we just did something crazy like 30 contests and stuff. And it was just out of enthusiasm and professionalism. We could pull it off. We wouldn't flake out. And I do think that relationship was a blast. And in fact, again, another thing here in my archive I'm looking at, there's the Wizard. They covered a Wizard number 75, which featured Lady Death on the cover.
Before we went live, I was talking about how much I always wanted to go visit the desert and go see Arizona. So I definitely got to make my way out there and make my way to this beautiful museum that you got right there. That's amazing. That's so cool. And you got all those artifacts, right? Like
Oh yeah.
like celebrating your legacy, bro. Dude, look at that. That's so freaking cool, dude. And you said that's open to the public. People can come and check that out, right?
Well, yes, so you make an appointment and they come on in for sure. I mean, even Coffin Comics, we're an island. We do a thing called Sworn Fest every other year, and that's a celebration of everything Coffin. People come in from literally around the world. From our fan base, if they're in town, they let us know. We give people tours and all that kind of stuff. We're sitting here at the top of a 10,000 square foot facility that includes complete fulfillment center, multiple offices for people in editorial, customer service, etc. We have a gigantic conference room slash bar. I mean, it's pretty done up. We even have a company store. So it is.
I love that you say a conference room / bar. That's perfect.
Got to have your priorities, man.
Yes, you do. I'm pretty good friends with Joe Casey. Me and him met like earlier last year, and he's been on the show a few times. And that was something I asked him was about Wizard magazine. He was like, "Oh man, like Wizard was it, dude. You had to if you could develop a good relationship with those guys, they would feature you." And that was a big deal. I mean, we're talking about days. I mean, I guess the internet was around, but it wasn't like it is today, right? And me and Joe have talked about this, like when Wizard went away, there was like a big gap there, and there's still a gap of like one place to go and get information about comics. It's kind of spread all over the place right now, right?
It is. Yeah. I mean, Wizard was the focus. Wizard kind of like guide people into saying, hey, this is kind of cool. Take a look at this. And we definitely had feature articles in there and it was all super rad. But there's nothing like Wizard anymore. Because now the comic book news media is generally corporate driven. So it's just featuring that kind of material, or it's very particular in what they cover and what they don't, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Tom Daly's in the chat. He wants to know where he can apply.
Man, people say that, but I got to tell you, you gotta, first of all, we need an opening, but then secondarily, it's like Coffin works hard. It's funny, even in our fulfillment center, like we've killed people off in a day. It's just kind of what it is, There's no free lunch in comics. Comics is a hardworking, ever-changing, fast-paced business. And Tom, just bring it.
Just bring it, Tom, man. There's hope, but you got to have the passion. You got to have the energy. Nobody does comics without passion.
That's true.
You don't get into comics for money. You know what I'm saying?
It's absolutely true. I mean, talked to this a lot of my peers. It's like you could do pretty good in comics, and there's a couple of people who, in the rare stratified air, do tremendously. But no one makes like athlete money in comics. So I always say this, and I think this is true. Is like I didn't pick comics; comics picked me because my aptitude was actually to be a lawyer and to be a litigator. So that I did this instead is just a sign that it's what I should have been doing.
Somewhere out there in the multiverse, there's lawyer Brian Pulido right now.
Yeah, but I'd still be that rock and roll lawyer, though,
Heck yeah. All right. Well, Wizard magazine, the forming of Chaos Comics, all that stuff that brings us to some of the worst times in the comic book industry. The mid to late 90s, early 2000s. It was pretty anemic. Marvel was declaring bankruptcy. Numbers were shrinking.
Yeah.
It was a big change. How did you manage to make it through that time? Because you did, because you're still here. So like, what did you do? Like what, like when you look back on it, did you know that there was a big bubble burst that had happened? Did you notice something? Were you kind of isolated, I guess, because you had such a fan base already? How did that work for you?
So ultimately my first company, Chaos Comics, filed for a Chapter 11 or Chapter 7 business bankruptcy in August of 2002. And that was because I had made a fair amount of strategical financial errors, and I did not read the market. I saw the contraction and I fought against it. And my goals were different. So back then, for short periods of time, Chaos Comics would, on a per title basis, outsell Batman and Superman. And I just wanted to continue the trend, but it wasn't to be. And I threw a lot of money at it to do it. So the business folded. And ultimately, over time, I accepted the complete responsibility of the failure and what skills I had lacked as a business person. However, I was still, I wouldn't say I'm going around with a chip on my shoulder, but I'm sort of beaten down. And it's true, the early 00s were kind of quiet for comics. And there were just times where I'd be at cons and I'm really starting to look at my life choices. That's we're going like 20, 26 years ago. And it was kind of a challenging time. So it was just sort of putting your foot in front of the other. At one point, my wife, who was very successful in anything my wife has touched, she is successful. And she was like the number one rep of a very high-end skincare line, selling millions of dollars a year of all this high-end skincare. And she was, doing very well. And she did come to me at a point and she said, maybe it's time for you to think of a plan B. Now, if you're married and your wife talks to you like that, you're either like it's either fit or fold. And that was a moment in time where I realized I got to wake up. I got to just get my ass going again. I got to get my show on the road. And that's what I did. I attempted to reconcile some business differences with a former publisher, and they could not be done person to person. So I sued that person. And then that person did what other people do, which is sued me back. And over the course of time, we settled the matter. But what came out of that was a complete clear title and ownership of the character Lady Death. And that was reconciled on October, 8th, 2014. And that began that, it was, Coffin was already going, but it was very modest. And it was just me doing exclusives at cons. But after that reconciliation, I said, I'm going to take a run at this thing all over again. And that began the process where on February 4th, 2015, I launched the first Lady Death Kickstarter, and the rest really accelerated. Now you and I are speaking today. We've done 46 crowdfundings, including Kickstarter, and even as you and I speak, we made the wild and crazy and risky decision of forming our own crowdfunding tool, and we now have moved off of the Kickstarter platform, and we launch our stuff on our own platform. So yeah, it's been a wicked and wild 10 years. And I could admit to you that I've gone everywhere from being kind of like asleep at the wheel to the realization that I am the guy who does this wild shit, So
Yeah.
life is a challenge.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that you're very honest about, what was going on with chaos in the early 2000s and the bankruptcy and everything. But like, not to be cliche, but it's like, Batman Begins is like, why do we fall, Bruce? So we learn how to pick ourselves back up.
It's true.
And you went through that and you learned how to rebound from that in the late 90s in Marvel's really rough time, but they were doing some really great stuff. And I always say this, Marvel in 1998 was so good because the only people working there really loved comics.
Yeah,
right.
that's true.
And you have like Kurt Busiek and George Perez doing Avengers, and you got like a revitalization of creative energy there.
Yeah.
And you did a little 4-issue series that I love and adore, and I've even covered on this channel multiple times, Supernaturals.
So much fun.
Knowing that you love 70s Marvel horror,
Yeah.
it totally makes sense, man. But I love that book, and
Thank you.
were one of the first people, like Yvonne Reese was on that book.
Yeah.
Right. And he's like a superstar now, dude. Can you just kind of run us through Supernaturals, how that project came about and how it happened?
Yeah. So there was the time of the Marvel nuts where Joe Quesada and Jimmy Palmiotti were packaging work for Marvel, everything from Daredevil to Punisher. And Marvel started expanding that premise and started approaching people like Jim Lee and others. And they simply approached me and said, what would you like to do? That was the offer. So Marvel Comics would pay me to write, produce, and hand files to them of a book that I want to do. So I did. I just turned my mind right to what I love about Marvel Comics, and that's the supernatural characters. And I chose the people who would work on that. So, you do mention Ivan Reis, but the thing to note was that Ivan was the regular artist on Lady Death for over 6 years prior to Supernaturals.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Holy cow, I forgot.
Yeah, he was doing work for Dark Horse on Ghost, and he's probably underemployed. So I snagged him and just made him a bigger offer with more regular work. And working with him was a delight. We continue to be friends to this day. Big up to those guys, and shout out to Ghost Machine and Ivan. And that's how that came about. It was super fun Mark and Draco was the writer of record. I packaged it, put it together, kind of wrote the plot. Mark wrote it. Ivan drew it. And I got great cover artist, Jim Ballant. I even had a premium edition done by Greg Capullo, some of his first work back at Marvel after X-Force. So it was just a ton of fun to do the book. And thanks for recognizing it.
Oh, whose idea was the masks? Was that you or was that?
Yeah, that was me for sure.
Yeah, I have all 5, by the way.
I love that. That's great.
I eventually went and dived enough. I mean, I run a comic shop right now too, right? And every time I get a collection of Supernaturals is in there, I would like go through and be like, "Is it the mask I need?" And now I have all 5 of them, man.
You know, as a horror fan, a filmmaker that I love and adore is a guy named William Castle. And he was known for gimmicks on his movies. So that would be including, like, there was a movie he made called The Tingler.
The Tingler, right? Yeah.
Weird little monster.
He would like shock people in the seats and shit, right?
Yes. Yeah, so just inspired by William Castle, I thought like something like The Mask would be kind of a hoot. Yeah, I guess for the people who get it, they really get it. That Capullo cover is very difficult to find and very expensive if you try to sell it.
Yeah, I don't have the Capullo cover though, I don't think. Or is that the way you get the extra mask? The masks were just like, there was like, each one came with a different mask, but there was like one that was randomly sent, like that was randomly in or something. Yes. I don't even remember who it was, but
well, the Capullo cover was a variant of #1, so it would be randomized masks.
Okay, word. Yeah, now I got to get that. I'm gonna make a note to find that Capullo. I mean, my Supernaturals collection is not complete. Oh man, I didn't even realize that.
We also had a preview book that we went around the con season with that year with Marvel. So there is a Supernatural previews book, and yeah, we tore it on that before the book came out.
Heck yeah. Here's another thing I want to talk about. A big thing, and a lot of people, like people like in their 20s, maybe in the industry now, you know, like readers and even creators, they don't remember the CrossGen stuff, right?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
CrossGen was wild. Like some dude inherited money, decided he wanted to bring people in and do like an in-house bullpen.
That's true.
And like he'd give you health insurance and all this blah blah blah. Lady Death wound up over there. You did the medieval Lady Death book, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
How did that come about? What was that like?
So Mark Alessi was the owner of CrossGen, and Mark had sold a company that he had built to Ross Perot and had an exorbitant amount of money. And he also loved comics. So very early on, when he got on the scene, I think he was one of the co-owners he was the owner initially of MegaCon. And I just got to know him. And so I got to know him differently than other creators. I could kind of look eye to eye to him since I was a comics publisher. So we got to know each other. And when Chaos Comics folded through a vagary of law, I owned Lady Death and in a sense brought her over to CrossGen. And the premise was that I would still write her, but it would be under a new premise, a medieval Lady Death, which, by the way, I loved. I mean, I thought the controlling premise was really cool. I didn't work in the CrossGen offices, but I visited, and I thought the premise of it was cool, but it didn't really work out for a lot of people. It's maybe not like the right head for people who are used to freelancing. However, what I would say that came out of it was many artists who worked on CrossGen titles went on to great fame and acclaim in long careers. I think CrossGen revolutionized comic book coloring. I think guys like Steve Epting came to CrossGen as one artist and left as a whole nother artist. So I don't know what was in the mix there exactly, but I think it really brought out some really great work out of people.
Yeah, Jim Chung on Scion was one of my favorite things that they did.
Great title. And by the way, Jim did draw 3 issues of Lady Death, The Wild Hunt.
Oh, heck yeah, dude. Yeah, Jim Chung was there. You had Jeff Johnson doing great stuff. Bart Sears, his samurai book, The Path. I still love that book, man. You had Ron Mars, Mark Lane, Butch Geis. Oh my goodness.
Greg Land on Sojourn.
Oh, Sojourn. That was amazing. That's where everybody really started noticing Greg Land, dude. That stuff was amazing, dude.
Yeah, great stuff.
Yeah, man. Well, thank you for doing. Now, I didn't realize that there was like such a long battle that something happened where you didn't necessarily have the rights to Lady Death until like 2014, 2015. I didn't know that, man. I didn't know that at all, man. That's got to be rough, man.
I'm happy it's behind me.
Yeah, I bet, right? So
I would say one thing that I really learned in that process was, again, I'd mentioned to you that post the chaos bankruptcy, I was kind of beaten down a little bit, but I didn't know I was, right? So I'm just
okay.
kind of going through life. But it was in the battle for the control back of the character that I actually really woke up, and I'm like, when I sued this person, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm the guy who does that kind of shit. Okay, cool. It really woke me up, no doubt. So I think it all happened for a very positive reason, and I literally have no regrets. It was, going through that, which was definitely its own, intense experience, was, woke my ass up.
Yeah. All right. Well, then you get the rights back,
Yeah.
100% back to you, which that's something very important to you, it seems, is owning your creations. And
Yeah.
I love, and like I said before, respect the hell out of that, Brian.
Thank you.
Like, we need more people in this industry like you. And
Mhm.
because of people like you, because of people like Todd McFarlane and the Rob Liefelds and the Jim Lees and the Image founders, Mark Silvestri, Eric Larson, all those dudes, we have an industry now that is way more vibrant and not so corporate, right?
Yeah.
Like corporate comics still kind of dominate, but like Image is like, they're like, I mean, if there's no longer a big two, it's a big three now,
Oh
And
yeah, sure.
I think that's
Yeah.
pretty freaking awesome.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
let's go to the formation of Coffin Comics, man. I guess
Yes.
what inspired you to do that, man?
So Coffin Comics is older than you know. So in September of 2007, I was invited to Dragon Con. And the gentleman who was in charge of Artist Alley, his name was Tom Thaler, rest in peace, suggested to me, he said, hey, when you come out to Dragon Con, would you consider making an exclusive? I was like, well, what do you mean? It's like, well, why don't you make something that's just for Dragon Con? And I said, all right, let me investigate that. Now, keep in mind, it's 2007. So I actually learned at that time of a thing called digital printing. Very new, less than 2 years old at the time. Remember, comic books historically were printed by offset based printing, meaning the minimums were frequently in the thousands, right? But I learned of a thing called digital printing, where every copy that came off the line was unique. And it was not lost to me right off the bat. So I cobbled together the interior of a book I had called Lady Death Dragon Wars. I actually picked panels from inside that comic and redesigned them as covers. And I made 3 editions. One edition limited to 100, one limited something like 50, and then one lettered. I brought them to Dragon Con and they sold out. And then I got it. And then I just started rinsing and repeating. So what was happening though is that was hyper underground. The way I published simply was going to cons and bringing an exclusive and selling it. Very common now, but super uncommon at the time because people didn't yet pick up on digital printing powerfully. So that began it. But what turbocharged Coffin Comics was using crowdfunding, using Kickstarter, and making brand new content. And that happened the first Lady Death story, Lady Death Chaos Rules, which was offered in February 4th, 2015. That's what lit Coffin up. Now, what people didn't know was I was already, even in the midst of settling a lawsuit, I decided I'm making this play. I'm going for it. So whether it was going to settle or not or whatever, I'm making this book. I was making Lady Death. I was making the second chapter. I was making my storyline La Muerta. I was making a 96-page graphic novel, Zack the Zombie Exterminator. And we just started premiering these things on Kickstarter. Now, in retrospect, it looks like it all went easy. But what I'm here to let you know is every single one of those projects had to hit, or I would have been toast. Because I was rolling every single penny I had, one over the other. And if they didn't hit, I'd be toast. So very luckily, there was the fan base. We started reconnecting, and then we just started really chugging along. And we started hitting these crazy record-breaking crowdfundings over time, sometimes reaching as much as $520,000 for a single Lady Death campaign.
Wow. Wow.
I
So
mean,
you were one of the early, like you jumped into crowdfunding. I love the idea now that you got your own crowdfunding platform.
yes.
And bro, you're ahead of the game. I think I've heard you say before that you always felt like you were behind the times at certain times in your career.
Yeah, that's
Right
true.
now, dude, you are like on the nose of it, man. I think
Well,
now you've been through so much, you see the shifts and changes in the industry, right? And you know how to ride those waves now, right?
yeah, one of those, like, I mean, handful of people. I don't know what it's worth, right? But I am one of these handful of people who watches comics, and tried to read the tea leaves. And I've been spending the better part of 30 years doing that. The interesting thing is I never read comic book news sites at all. I I just kind of get kind of real with what's out there in the marketplace and try to see what to do, what's next, how to go. And we are in this interesting era of comics where there's a multitude of ways to get comics. And but we thought every time that Coffin Comics has chosen to do something on its own, we've been rewarded. So we actually have nothing but great things to say about Kickstarter. Kickstarter is a remarkable platform, completely life-changing for us. We did 45 projects to date with Kickstarter to generate $11.5 million. And we reserve the right to go back to Kickstarter for other exciting projects for the future. But we thought, it was time to 10 years into new comics publishing, it was time to put our big boy and girl pants on and to do our main publishing schedule through our own platform. And I'm happy to announce that we have a campaign going right now called Latest Savage Rain. You can find it at coffinlaunch.com and go there and see the difference for yourself. It's very simple. It's very, very easy to navigate. And I am happy to announce that we have 2,200 backers already, and it's doing exactly what we hoped it would do.
All right, I'm about to throw that link in the chat for everybody. Coffinlaunch.com. You got retailer tiers and stuff in that too, do you?
Not retailer tiers, but by the same token, Coffin Comics does have a very robust wholesale relationship. So there's an element of our main storefront, which is Coffin Comics Shop, where wholesalers get the same offerings they would have normally gotten from Diamond, still get them right from us. When Diamond announced its Chapter 11 bankruptcy, we chose respectfully to sever ties until such a time that their matters were settled. And we actually moved to distributing directly to retailers. And I'm happy to announce that in addition to the accounts that we already had, since then, we've signed up 178 wholesale accounts, and we are right now servicing some of the top accounts in the country.
I just recently signed up for my comic shop, man, because I was like, I got a rabid fan base for your work at my shop. And there's no way that we can't have, if I don't have the next Lady Death book on my shelf, I'm going to hear it. You know what I'm saying? Plus I collect them all too. And dude, I'm not trying to talk shit about other companies or whatever, but man, the quality of the artwork and the paper and the actual physical product is better than so many of them. Like, I'm not trying to talk shit about anybody, but like your products right now have a higher quality than Marvel, whether it's from the artwork and the writing or whether it's the actual physical artifact itself. You put a lot of care into that, man.
Well, we love it. And like one of the many slogans we have is everything matters. One thing I'd like to point out to you too is that you'll notice that on all of our titles, our creative teams are very consistent. So for example, Diego Bernard, current artist on Lady Death, he has been with Lady Death for 6 years. Joel Gomez, artist on La Muerta, has been the artist for 10 years. Myself and Mike McLean co-write everything. So we just have people that like stick. And you got to ask yourself, why is that, right? So what we like to think is that we're providing an environment for creative people to win, and people just get to do their job. They don't have to worry where the next paycheck's coming from. We pay fast, we take care of people, and that kind of thing. Now, you early on in our conversation mentioned John Byrne's run on Fantastic Four. Now, that lasted for a good amount of issues from, if memory serves, from something like 232 to 278 or some such.
Yeah, I think you got that right on the nose, bro.
So something like that. But what that time is gone. You don't get top talent like that staying on titles for years on end. So I think that's another thing that we all as comic fans like. We like seeing consistent creative teams that stick on things. But we are in a strange short attention span world where there's this feeling of having to restart things all the time. But I'm from a different view. I get my creative inspiration from bands like AC/DC, Iron Maiden, Slayer, who have a very consistent sound that they keep refining. And there's no crazy, like, I'm going to do a country album this time. So when people read a Lady Death comic book, it is the same feeling since the beginning because it's the same character. She's gone through a lot of arcs. She's gone through a lot of changes. There's been times where she's literally been insane. There's been times when she's been a hero. But you can feel the consistency. And I think, again, that's another thing that a lot of us who read comics feel is lacking in the modern era, because they're switching over and flipping creative teams every 4 months to, at the onset, 2 years.
Yeah. I love the consistency in your work, man, especially
Thank you.
today. And I appreciate that, man. As a
Thanks.
retailer, I appreciate it. As a reader, I
Thanks.
love it. As a retailer, I really appreciate it because I never have people go, drop me from Lady Death. That never happens. It
That's
never
awesome to hear.
happens. Yeah,
I love
no,
it.
it just keeps growing, dude. There is a very dedicated fan base. And I think you understand that, right? And it's kind of like,
Yeah.
I love that you mentioned Iron Maiden.
Yeah.
Iron Maiden, like they have control of their destiny,
They
right?
do.
Like they have the same sound, they're consistent, but they've got, well, what's the dude's name?
Eddie.
Eddie, that's right. They got him, and they can market that. They can make Funko Pops, they can make action figures and t-shirts and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And you are kind of like the Iron Maiden of comic books, bro.
I'll take it. I'll take it. That's
You really
right.
are. You mentioned the Diamond bankruptcy. We're in another one of those big gear shift moments, I
We
think,
are.
and especially
Yeah.
being a retailer, I get asked this a lot, and I'm like, yeah, I want everybody to succeed, but
Yeah.
the industry needs to grow and the industry needs to go where it needs to go. Where do you think the future? What do you think the future of this is? Because I love that you guys did that. I remember when I first got the email, I guess a couple weeks ago,
Yeah.
that Coffin was going direct to consumer and direct to retailer, and I
Yeah.
was like, good for you, bruh,
Thank you.
because you don't need to be reliant on something that is unsure right now,
Yeah.
right? Nobody
Yeah.
knows what the future of Diamond is right
That's true.
now.
Yeah.
So what do you think the future is? And what do you think, how do you think comic books can grow beyond this?
Well, one of the things that I know is that I don't know what the future is. So given that, that tends to inform some of my actions. So one of the actions that we chose to take is we do not know how this is what I know. That we don't know how the Diamond bankruptcy is going to shake out. There are a lot of tremendous people that have decades-long relationships with there. Our choice was purely business. I'm accountable to my own staff and my own creative talent. So we knew that we could keep supplying, and we just simply had a concern if we kept supplying, God forbid, that got further gobbled up in any of the future ramifications of the bankruptcy. So we did make the decision to go direct, if only because we can do it. We actually print all our comic books in the great state of Arizona. So it's very easy. We've always printed them here. We did our breakdowns for the Diamond warehouse here, and then just shipped them out anyway. So for us to do that for another couple of hundred accounts, that's also easy for us. You have to understand that we put out somewhere in the neighborhood of 40,000 orders a year anyway, not including Diamond. So this is just what we do. We have a full staff for it. So that is a hedge against the uncertainty. Now, we had prior to the bankruptcy, we had actually made inroads towards Lunar, but they showed no interest, and that's fine. They don't owe me a thing. So our conclusion from that is, okay, we just have to do it on our own, and if people want it, great. If they don't, we accept that as well.
It kind of goes all the way back to your Evil Ernie movie script, right? Where you're like, hey, I don't like this fine print.
Yeah.
Screw you, I can do it myself.
Yeah, I'm not even angry about it either. I mean, we just kind of got to go. We got to go what serves the Coffin initiative, and that's to service our fans and the stores. Here's one thing I think we knew. So Diamond, I don't even know what the full amount of accounts are, but let's say for the sake of this conversation, it was 2,500. We know, based on the ordering behavior since 2016, that maybe 300 shops were the ones that were really selling Coffin Comics. And that's fine. So that's the shops we want to reach. That's the shops we want to supply. So that's the agenda.
Yeah. Well, I'm one of those shops, and I'll tell you, at my shop, you outsell Captain America.
Okay, man, I'm all about it. Well, here's the cool news. We are putting a lot more time, attention. We're refining our terms. We're really looking at how can we be more of service. So what I'm saying to you directly, so is that hopefully you're going to see more attention to the retail section and really listening to what your needs are and responding better to all those things.
Yeah. One thing, when I was looking at everything this week on your site for retailers, I really love that I have the option to get the book signed as well.
Yes.
No distribution service has ever done that, man.
Yeah.
That's freaking awesome, dude. I think that's great because
Thank you.
everything I guess is in house. Like you said, you print them in Arizona, y'all
Yeah.
make them there. Like
Yeah.
you have a. I love that you like. I love that you said I have a responsibility to my staff and my creative people.
Yeah.
Bruh, you don't hear
Yeah.
that from a lot of publishers, man. And you don't, man. And I love it, dude. And I really
Thank you.
appreciate that. So I want to ask you this, man. How important do you think self-publishing, independent creators, how important do you think that is, especially going forward in our industry today?
Well, I think that we're actually in a golden age of content. Maybe not from the big two completely. They have their hits, right? I mean, the Absolute series over at DC, it's fantastic. I'm really enjoying it. But really where the stoke has been for like the last 10, 15 years has been in companies like Boom, some of the creator-owned titles, Image, ever since, is it Eric Stevenson's heads it up?
Yep.
He went for like a real curated feel for what they're putting out, and I
Yeah, and
really
you get all
enjoy
the
it.
Ed Brubaker stuff. You got
Yeah,
Saga, you know, you
yeah,
got all that stuff pumping, man.
yeah. So I think it's vital, and it's very exciting. And if people look, you could really find comics that'll excite you more than ever. I do think probably the golden era of the Marvel DC comics that we all love, where people had long runs. I mean, I'm not seeing it on the horizon. I do hope for it. I mean, I am a longtime Marvel fan, so I always hope. But I think the juice really is in the independents right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I love I'm a big so recently in the news, everybody's been like losing their shit over the Rob Liefeld statements about the Deadpool Wolverine movie and how he's like, I'm done with Deadpool because I'm done with Marvel because they don't care about creators and blah blah blah. People keep asking me about this, and everybody's got their opinions on Rob, right? I love
Yeah,
Rob because we're still talking about Rob Liefeld, right?
yeah,
Like we're
yeah.
still talking about him, and so I think that's really cool. But I think he's kind of right, man. I don't think that especially today or even historically, Marvel and DC, they don't seem to care so much about the creators.
Yeah.
I had a great chance to to host a panel with Kevin Eastman, and this was something I asked him. I was like, "How important is this? Like creator rights and blah blah." He's like, "Man, my whole career is based on that." And man, you turned down a movie deal from the producers of Hellraiser
Yeah.
because you wanted to retain ownership, man. If
Oh,
there's anybody out there trying to make a comic book, what would you tell them? Would you like how important do you think it is to own your work?
well, okay, that's a lot. So first, let me go back to Rob Liefeld. Rob Liefeld is 100% right. Everyone's got to cut through the noise and grapple with the fact that Rob is right. The creators of this stuff that creates billions and billions of dollars of revenue for corporations should absolutely be recognized at the front of the movie. He was totally within his rights to ask, and I actually applaud him because he takes it on the chin. He takes a lot of people's opinions. And I'll also say this: everyone can have an opinion, but man, Rob Liefeld has walked the walk. He really has. He's been through the wars. You know, I'm a fan. That's it. You know, what can I tell you? So I think he's absolutely right, and people should get the message. You know, cut through the noise and listen to the message. The creators of the thing should be at the front and they should be recognized. They should not be kicked behind. So that's my feeling on that. Do I feel that each individual creator has to know what their objectives are, their mission is, and pursue it. Now, people could sell their stuff off. That's perfectly fine as long as they make their peace about it. I've actually turned down a significant amount of deals for Lady Death to be a motion picture because the deal's not right yet. Because so many of the deals involve relinquishing of rights for money that seems like a lot of money, but knowing how we do, it's not enough money. So, you know, it's a catch-22 with Lady Death because it's like, hey man, we'll cut you $1 million for the motion picture rights, and it's like, yeah, it's just not enough. It's like, yeah, but we would never do more than that, and it's like, dude, we'll make more than that on Lady Death, very short, you know, without being like obnoxious about it, but it's like it's not enough because
Yeah.
we'll just make too much money on it anyway. So I think each individual creator's gotta, you know, do what they got to do. I would say, like, you know, going this particular path is always harder, is always more challenging, involves more work, more stick-to-itiveness, more fortitude, just more gumption. We are here and we have launched our own crowdfunding platform, and the Diamond thing has happened. And, I'm not playing it off. I think every single person involved in comics, it's had an impact, whether it's psychological, it's financial, it is a gear shift and everyone's wrapping their head around it. And so the comics just aren't really for the weak of heart. To stand the test of time in comics definitely includes a lot of persistence and a lot of tears. It's what it is.
Yeah, absolutely, dude. I love that. I love that. All right, before we wrap up, anything you got to like talk about or promote? Like what's coming up? What Coffin Comics? You got the Coffin verse. That's another thing comic book fans love is
Yeah, I love.
continuity. And they
Me
love
too.
like an expanded universe. And that's what you're doing, dude. Because it's not just Lady Death. You got Hell Witch, La
Right.
Muerta. You got so many
Yep.
different things going on, all
Yep.
related together, man. So what's going on with you, man? What do you got to talk about before we wrap up, man?
Well, I'll tell you what. I can tell you exactly what I'm up to, but the best way to stay current on everything that's happening at Coffin Comics, if this would be your cup of tea, simply go to coffincomics.com. Sign up for our newsletter. It's on the upper right hand of the main page, and you will be entering into a world that is very immersive. We do publish comics and merchandise. We have events like Sworn Fest, and it's quite fun. It's quite intense. My career is entering its 34th year, and we're still having a lot of fun doing it. Right now, this second, we're promoting Lady Death Savage Reign, a sword and sorcery story that can be found right now on coffinlaunch.com. Get the story for as little as $26, and in return, you get a 48-page square pound book, free digital download, all free unlocked, what we call free swag. And let's see, what else do you get? Free US shipping. So that's a pretty good deal in this day and age. So there's more to come. It's the what is happening is infinite. So I think the best bet is sign up to our mailing list, and you will learn what it's all about.
Heck yeah. All right. Well, Brian, thank you so much for taking your time. I
Thank you.
believe you got a show to get to. What show are you going to tonight again?
Well, it's true. Kerry King of Slayer is doing a solo tour, and I am seeing Kerry King and Municipal Waste tonight. I'm leaving like in 5 minutes.
Heck yeah. Well,
Yeah.
we're not going to keep you any longer, but Brian, thank you so much. I hope we can do this again. This has been a great conversation, and you
Fantastic, man.
are
The place is all mine.
absolutely, you're a pillar of this community and this industry, man. So keep doing what you're doing. You out there, thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe, all that jazz. We're dipping out. Station.